Kalėdų laisvas, laimingų žmonių internetas.
Sveiki, jei pamenate, praėjusiame Radikalaus smalsumo sezone su australų mokslo populiarintoju dr. Karl bent kartą per mėnesį atsakydavome į jūsų siųstus klausimus apie viską. Kur baigėsi visata, ar kiaušiniai sveika, ar vaiduokliai egzistuoja, o kristalai gydo, kas būtų, jei kristume į giliausią duobę žemėje, ar 5G kenkia, ar įmanoma čiaudėti atsimerkus, kaip atprasti nuo socialinių tinklų ir daugybė kitų klausimų. Toks yra dr. Karl. Jis yra kaip kokia enciklopedija ir gali atsakyti į bet kokius klausimus ir tai daro jau 40 metų. Šį kartą savo socialiniuose tinkluose paprašiau jūsų atsiųsti klausimų, o dr. Karl mielai sutiko į juos atsakyti. So the first question is, how much water do we have to drink per day?
We lose water with every breath. And also carbon dioxide. So we have to replace it. So if you weigh yourself on the digital scales last thing at night before you go to bed, and then in the morning, assuming that you did not visit the bathroom during the night, weigh yourself again, you'll have lost maybe 300, 500 grams.
Wow.
And that is mostly water and carbon dioxide that you are breathing out through your mouth. So that has to be replaced. So you need maybe 4 or 5 glasses of water a day, but that water is usually present in tea, in coffee, and in the foods that you eat. So the way to work out how much water you need to drink is to look at your wee, the colour of your urine when you go to the bathroom. If it's a very small amount and very dark in colour, not drinking enough. If it's very light and you're going all the time, you're drinking too much. Just somewhere in between. But the straight 8 glasses that you have to have, that was invented back in the 40s, and in that paper they said that most of that comes in the food that you eat. And they left out the bit about the food, so people are feeling guilty. Can you actually imagine that? People feeling guilty about not drinking enough water.
Yes. I think I have felt like this a couple of times and thinking, oh, I'm not drinking enough water, I should drink more water, and so on and so on. So the answer is in our P, actually. That's fun. How about meat? Is vegetarianism healthy for humans, for us, and what does science say about that?
Well, let's look at the 3 situations of a carnivore, a meat eater, like you, like the average person, on average in the world, or a vegetarian who doesn't eat meat, or a vegan who doesn't eat meat and products that eventually came from an animal, such as egg or milk. Now, with regard to a meat eater, it is ridiculously easy to stay healthy. You get a bit of meat, you heat it up to kill the germs, you eat it. You get some vegetables, one of each colour, red, green and white, with each meal, and then you steam them up and then you eat them. And you have pretty well got everything you need. You're getting something called B12. Now, B12 is tricky. B12 comes from a bacterium that has invaded the animals that we eat. So it spreads through the whole body and leaves behind the B12. So if you go to vegetarian, there are 4 main nutrients that you are running at risk of running low on, but if you keep those levels high, you can be very healthy. Now, with becoming a vegetarian, you can't just simply have the meat and the 3 vegetables, 3 vegetables, and then just get rid of the meat. No. You have to understand your food. You have to know about complementary proteins. So, for example, meat has all the proteins that you need in the right ratios, and so do eggs, and so do soybeans, and that's kind of it. If you want to have other proteins, other beans like chickpeas and lima beans and so forth, You have to have these beans mixed with those beans so you get the right amino acids. But if you know what you're doing, you can get the right proteins and be perfectly healthy. And also, you have to get iron, which comes easily from meat, and the B12, which comes easily from the meat, and calcium, which comes from the cows, and iodine, which comes from either crops that are grown near the ocean or from fish. And so these are the main problems that vegetarians can have. But if they pay attention to it, they can get their B12 and their iron. Vegetarians actually need more calcium than meat eaters, which is surprising.
Yeah.
And what happens is that the chemicals in the vegetables called phytates, and there are other such chemicals as well, they grab the iron and the calcium and make it not available. So it turns out that vegetarians need to eat slightly more iron and slightly more calcium to have the same calcium and iron levels as a meat eater. But because their fat content is usually lower and because they understand their food, they can be healthier. And then finally we go to vegan. It is possible, but very difficult, but it is possible for a woman to be a vegan and be pregnant and have a healthy pregnancy and give birth to a healthy baby and then bring that baby up as a vegan, but it is really tricky. For example, you have to, as the mother now feeding the baby, you have to cut down on the fibre that the baby eats and give the baby extra high levels of fat because the baby's tummy is very small, and if you give it the regular amounts of fibre, it won't have the right nutrition. But if you know what you're doing, and you've really got to know it, you can bring up a perfectly healthy baby, but it's a lot of extra work.
So it's super important before stopping to eat meat or other products that come from animals. We have to do our research and consult specialists and professionals if we want to stay healthy. It's super important, as I understand.
Correct. And the sort of person you want to speak to is not a medical doctor like me. In all of my years of medical training, the total number of hours that I did of dietetics, nutrition, was 8 hours.
Oh.
That's nothing. Whereas a dietitian would study 5 to 10 years. They're the right people to see. And by the way, if you're considering going down this pathway, start a food diary before you make the appointment to go and see the dietitian and write down everything you eat at each meal during the day. And then when you go to see the dietitian, they'll say, well, start a food diary and come back in 1 month, and you go, shung, and there's a food diary.
Okay.
And you've saved yourself a whole month's wait.
Next question. Do we know how we came into existence?
Which stage do you want? Like, so, okay, so firstly there was the Big Bang, and then everything cooled down, and here we are. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. So on Earth, it cooled down about 4.5 billion years ago. And then around 3.8 billion years ago, we had the first living creatures, single-celled creatures. And everything was single-celled until about 1 billion years ago. And slowly we began to have multi-celled creatures. So instead of something like a bacterium, which is just one cell, we had creatures that had cells for thinking and moving and eating and nervous systems and liver and spleen. Nothing much happened for about 750 million years until about 500 million years ago. 500 million years ago, roughly, we had the pre-Cambrian explosion. So pre means before, Cambrian, referring to Cambridge in England, where they first discovered these fossils. Explosion, massive increase in biodiversity of life. Amazing increase. And life stayed in the oceans from about 520 million years ago to around 400 million years ago. And then animal life began to come onto the land about 400 million years ago. Around 220 million years ago, there were three main different types of creatures trying to be the top creature running the planet. Now, unfortunately, this time, for various reasons, the oxygen level had dropped. It had dropped from 35% oxygen about 350 million years ago down to 11%. Okay, let's look at the contenders for being the top animal on the planet. Firstly, there were the reptiles, but they've got their legs out to the side and they can't move very fast, and the air was only 11% oxygen. So every time they breathed in some air, they would dilute it with the low oxygen air already inside the lungs. Then there were the mammals. The mammals had legs under their hips, like you and I have.
Yes.
And so we could move faster, but once again, we had these terrible lungs. The incoming air was diluted by the low oxygen air already in the lungs. And finally, we had the dinosaurs. They had their legs below their hips and the air would come into their lungs, the oxygen would be taken out, and then it would go into their hollow bones and then do a circuit and then come out. And this gave them an advantage in how much oxygen they could extract from the low oxygen, 11% air. And in fact, birds are dinosaurs and they're still around and they have hollow bones as well. Okay, so the majority of the dinosaurs died out about 65 million years ago. About 55 million years ago, there were creatures with two legs, but only this high. Move forward 7 million years ago, the creatures that would become you and me, we split off from the chimpanzees. Nothing much happened for about 5 million years. So from 7 million years to 2 million years ago, we stayed in the trees like the chimpanzees. But 2 million years ago, we had two mutations. First, we lost our massive body hair and became almost hairless. And hair is made of protein. And the hair started going into the brain. And our brains began to get bigger about 2 million years ago. And the second thing that happened was that we had a mutation in our hips. So now we could walk on the land and we could start to do things with our thumb and forefinger. Now, a chimpanzee has the same pretty close thumb and forefinger like we have, but we can do this. Now, see this?
Yeah.
I can do that. I can roll the pen. See that? I can roll it. The chimpanzee doesn't have enough brain to do that. So from 2 million years ago to now, our brains got bigger and bigger and bigger. 600,000 years ago, there was a creature called Homo heidelbergensis, a little bit smaller than us, slightly smaller brain, but we're pretty confident, for various reasons, that they had language. And then 200,000 years ago, you and I came on, Homo sapiens sapiens. 70,000 years ago, the number of humans dropped to only 2,000 on the whole planet.
Why?
When in Indonesia, a mountain called Mount Toba exploded and turned into Lake Toba and threw 1,000 cubic kilometres of dust into the atmosphere. And so in the middle of an ice age, the temperature dropped by another 3 or 4 degrees. And there are only about 2,000 men and women. Now, all of the women today came from all those roughly 1,000 women back then.
Wow.
But all of the men today came from only one man. Now, it's not as though one man said, hey, you other 999 men go and make a fence while I go and check out these other creatures called women. But there were different lines and they all died out, except for one. And here we are today thinking that we are the peak of evolution because we have invented poetry income tax,
Computers.
and weapons of mass destruction.
Yes. Wow.
So does that answer the question of where we came from?
I think it does. I will ask the person who gave the question. And actually, it's super interesting because you just gave the history of life on Earth for people in a hurry. How much pain can a human handle?
How much?
Pain.
It depends. Firstly, in people who do feel pain, and that implies that there are people who do not feel pain. In people who feel pain, there is a spectrum. I am at one end of the spectrum where I will faint and scream and cry. I am very wussy, is that a word in Lithuanian? Very fragile,
Yes,
is that a word?
we have the word. We have the word that fits the description.
According to my medical colleagues, on average, certain people such as the Vietnamese, and this is very loose, tend to be very stoic or pain resistant. And on one occasion, when I was working as a doctor in the emergency department, a Vietnamese man came in and I said, "G'day, how you going? I'm Karl, I'm John." That was his chosen name. And I said, "You're walking a little bit stiffly." We were walking to the cubicle together. I'd introduced myself to him. I was going to examine him. And I said, "Are you in pain?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, a little bit. And so I got him to lie down on the bed, and he behaved like he was in a bit of pain, a bit stiff here. And it turned out that he had a burst appendix.
Wow.
He had an appendix,
And he
which
can
had
still
actually
walk?
burst. And wait for it, he was a very lean man. So I got this from the history. And with an appendix, and you press on the tummy, it doesn't hurt when you press in. It hurts when you let go suddenly. Right? It doesn't hurt so much when you press in, but it hurts when you let go suddenly. And then he did that, and it was down in the bottom right-hand corner of his tummy, so it was pretty obvious, and also his clinical history. But he was very slim and lean and had hardly any body fat. Now, inside your tummy, inside the stomach wall, the gut wall, there are structures inside called the omentum, O-M-E-N-T-U-M, and it's a wall of fat. And what it can do is wrap itself around the appendix and wall it off. Amazing that it does this. Omentum. There's a greater omentum, the lesser omentum. It's the greater omentum that does this, and that's what happened in his case. But he was very lean, and when I pressed on his tummy, it was almost like pressing on a wooden desk. And he was so low in fat, very slim. Just for fun, I got a coin and I dropped it onto his tummy and it bounced.
How?
Because his tummy muscles were so solid in pain. And so I called in the other nurses and the doctors to have a look at this because this is incredibly rare. And he was doing what we call in medicine abdominal guarding. So his tummy muscles had just gone solid to stop him from affecting his appendix.
Wow.
And the operation, it was a happy ending. He lived, nobody died, everything happy, happy, happy. So that's at the other extreme of withstanding pain. Now, we have found 3 sets of people who do not feel pain. They don't feel pain. One are some circus athletes in Pakistan. And the family travels around Pakistan doing circus, and they normally die in their 20s from a broken bone that's poking through the skin, and they don't feel any pain. And we've managed to track that down to an abnormality of type 19 of the sodium-potassium pump. Do you know about the sodium-potassium pump?
No.
Okay, so you are made of about 37 trillion cells. Lung cells, liver cells, red blood cells, yada, yada, yada. And each cell has an electric charge on it. It has a membrane. It has an electric charge where it's negative on the outside and positive on the inside. And the way that it's negative on the outside and positive on the inside is that there are pumps. Calcium pumps, chloride pumps, and sodium-potassium pumps. And so what they do is they pump sodium one way and potassium the other way, and you end up with a charge imbalance. So you end up with a cell negative on the outside and positive on the inside of the membrane. When I went through medicine, there was one sodium-potassium pump. Now there's about 30 we've discovered. And an abnormality of type 19 means that you don't feel any pain. Second case. You know how people, even though they're made of meat, react to chemicals from vegetables like the opiates and cannabis?
Yes.
Turns out that we make our own natural cannabinoids and we make our own natural opiates. And there's a woman in England who makes her cannabinoids in a weird way as though she's almost high and disconnected and she doesn't feel pain. So she's got a second variation where she doesn't feel pain and she's sort of a little bit disconnected from the world, so she doesn't feel pain. But when her husband died, she said, "Oh, that's sad."
Not even emotional pain?
Yeah, she didn't feel, she felt no emotional pain. So her main reaction was, "Oh, my husband has died, but I just bought a bus ticket good for 3 months. I'll have to cash it in."
Wow.
And then the third group of people are a family in Italy who once again don't feel any pain, and we don't know their mechanism yet.
Hopefully science will find it out. And we have a couple of more questions left. The next question from the audience is, what data do scientists get from the Voyager mission? And is it possible that the spacecraft will ever reach another galaxy?
Well, for the Voyager spacecraft, there were two of them, were launched way back in 1977 with an expected life of 10 years, and they're still going.
Wow.
And so one of them went to Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and Neptune. And the other one went to Jupiter and Saturn, and they deliberately made it go into a very tight orbit to have a look at Titan, and that meant it couldn't go to the other planets, but they got a lot of information about Titan. And there's Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, and in 80,000 years from now, they should get to the nearest star, which is 4 light years away. I mean, they should get to that distance of 4 light years. It'll take them 80,000 years to get 4 light years. The nearest galaxy is 2 million light years away, which is 500,000 times further. So 500,000 multiplied by 80,000 is a lot of zeros. That's how long it will take. That's a lot of zeros. 80,000 multiplied by 500,000. Now, they're still working. They work on getting electricity from the radioactive decay of plutonium. And when they started, they were getting 400 watts. Now, only a few hundred. So they've switched off most of their experiments because they have to use energy to keep the spacecraft warm, but they're still monitoring the environment that they're in. And they've just left the pollution bubble of the sun. Our sun is a big polluting engine. Every second it burns 620 million tons of hydrogen, turns it into 616 million tons of helium, and there's a shortfall of 4 million tons, and 3 million tons gets turned into energy, and every second, 1 million tons per second of charged particles gets thrown out as a pollution bubble. And this is called the heliosphere. Helio, the Greek word for sun, sphere, meaning a ball. And so one of them has just left the pollution bubble of the sun and is now in the space between the stars. How long will it keep going for? As long as we can keep it going.
Wow, it's actually my favorite mission. So hopefully we will find something out about the interstellar space, at least in our lifetimes. Or maybe not, we don't know. So the next question is, it's very actually, maybe the question is more of your opinion. It's more philosophical, because we all know the phrase that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Does beauty depend on our own particular point of view? What do you think?
There is a branch of philosophy dealing with beauty, which is called aesthetics, number one. Number two, suppose I get a photograph of my face and then I divide it down the middle and then mirror flip it. So that way I can have a face where both sides are my left side and both sides of my right side. On average, the left side of your face is more attractive. So I'm making sure that I'm looking at you with the left side of my face.
Me as well, then.
Yes. Right.
To look more beautiful.
Now we have a word in the English language called a thesaurus, which has nothing to do with dinosaurs, but it's called Roget's, R-O-G-E-T, thesaurus, and it's a book of words that have the same meaning. And in that book, beauty and symmetry have the same meaning. And it turns out that the more symmetrical an animal is, left to right, on one hand we see it as more beautiful, but it's also more healthy and more fit. So if you look at horses, horses, 4 legs. If you look
I've
at their
seen
face,
a horse in my life.
Oh, I don't know what you have there in Lithuania.
We have horses.
Oh my God, what a cultured country. We have kangaroos.
Wow.
Okay, so symmetrical horses run faster. Symmetrical babies have fewer diseases than non-symmetrical people. But symmetry in humans is very complicated. And on one hand, the more symmetrical you are, the more tending to be beautiful you are. But on the other hand, if you get every face of, say, a man or a woman aged 20 to 21 or 22 to 23 or whatever, so they're the same age, and you blend them electronically, the average of all the faces of males or females in a particular age group is very beautiful or handsome. Yeah, the average. So maybe we need to follow the words of John Keats, the poet in English. Beauty is truth and truth is beauty.
Wow.
And that is all you need to know.
Wow, that's beautiful. And it was the last question we had from our audience today. Thank you, Karl, for joining me again. Hopefully see you next or maybe the month after that. If you have time, it's a pleasure to have you here, Karl, all the time.
The sooner, the better, Dr. Goda. I look forward and I hope that you get through the COVID thing as well and as healthily as possible.
You too, Karl. See you soon. Thank you.
Easy. Thank you.
Šį kartą tiek. Ačiū, kad žiūrėjote ir likite su Delfi televizija.
Tele2 laisvas, laimingų žmonių internetas.